thank you for bringing the coffees.
Oh, cheers.
Where are they from?
Wildflower Coffee, just down the street.
Sweet. This is part of the Coffee and Climate series. I did not expect to be sitting in a church for anything related to climate, anything related to this series. Can you just tell me a little bit about why we're here?
Yeah, well, just in general, we have found in our organization that people who practice a faith, whatever that might be, Buddhist, Baha'i, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, are just as concerned about the climate as anybody else. And in some respects have some calling within their framework specifically to care for creation and be engaged in this issue. More locally, this particular church, I chose this because it was kind of ground zero for first aid for some of the uprising that happened around George Floyd's murder and the outfall of that in our city. And we created a first aid station here, which I think is emblematic of what congregations can aspire to in climate change, of becoming places that help people in times of crisis.
And before we jump in, I'm so curious about how the protests tie in with, faith and climate, and it's just in such an interesting intersection. What does Minneapolis Interfaith Power and Light do?
Yeah, well, we help resource people of faith to get involved in the climate justice movement or in the climate action movement. People of faith come to this with a lens of justice, I think, and something on their hearts that compels them more than just reading the newspaper, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And our organization helps in a lot of different ways to do that. We listen to people, what they're interested in, and we go find the resources to help them do what they want to do.
So it's climate advocacy.
Yep.
But there's not a specific mission that you're pushing at all times. It's more so supporting others on their advocacy work?
Yeah, it's probably a little of both. We say we work in three different, we call them three legs of the stool: practical, systemic, and relational. Practical things are, the household changes you make, behavioral changes. So we're drinking out of to-go mugs instead of, something as simple as that. Composting, solar systems, all those different things that reduce our carbon emission. Systemic would be advocating at maybe legislative levels or with a school board or working with your business association, your Rotary, any kind of a larger system that helps create the kind of change we need at those systems. And then relational is, everything from taking a nature walk to be fed and connected to the earth that we care about, to praying, to learning about other people, maybe getting into a relationship with somebody in your neighborhood that you didn't know as well and understanding how they think about the climate. So we think about all three of those aspects, and we find that when we work in each of those simultaneously, we develop a practice that's more sustaining. And you don't burn out and get as despaired and disappointed. And because the longer you work in this field, the more the challenge really rises, and you see how big a change we have to make.
Yeah, I feel I'm fresh to this, so I have not gotten to the burnout stage, but I can see how, the news is crazy, and I feel like so much of the climate news is so negative, so it's great to hear how people are sustaining, the work. When you are working with churches and different people in the community, what is the approach? Like, how are you, activating?
Well, different congregations have different actions that appeal to them. So we come in and listen and learn what's this unique community's kind of charism, or what's on their heart, what do they like to do? Mm-hmm. Some congregations, they may have a couple of people who are just passionate about this issue. And the main thing they want to do is help improve their congregation facility, their campus. They want their building to be more efficient so they can draw down their utility bills and offset their fossil fuel use. and they want to put a solar system on, or they want to get LED lights. And that's all they're really interested in. And other congregations, they might have a real tradition of legislative action. Maybe they've had a feeding program and they really care about hunger issues, and they've been down at the Capitol and they already kind of know what that's like, and they want to do that. They just want to do it on climate issues. So we can help them get involved with what are the key bills at the legislature that are really about climate and really need kind of fuel, but people active talking to their representatives. So it just it depends on what the community is curious about, what they're interested in. One congregation we worked with had a lot of kids, really involved with kids. They hired a musician to write music and create a musical, and they created a play, a shadow puppet play that their children put on, and they took it on the road and went to other faith communities and nonprofits and libraries and showed that. And that's what they want to do.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute.
It's just as you can imagine, the creativity among different people is just what's on their heart, how do they want to get involved?
Yeah. How does it's such a mouthful. MNIPL.
Yeah,
is
Minnesota Interfaith Power. It is a mouthful, yeah.
How do you congregate as an organization?
Yeah, we're one of 40 affiliates across the country. The Interfaith Power and Light kind of movement was started back in '98 in California and spread across the country. There's 40 different affiliates across the country now. The Power and Light name suggests that we work in energy, and we do tend to skew that way. We do a lot with community solar, with solar institutions, with renewable energy, wind and solar, and getting into those, building efficiency, household audits for energy efficiency, all that kind of stuff we can help with. But we're not limited to that, and we really take more of a justice focus. We look at, we've developed a lot of relationships in Minnesota with our indigenous brothers and sisters and try to center the indigenous voices, or look at treaty rights and, changing the narrative on how we've related to tribal nations in our state. So we have that Power and Light name, but we've kind of expanded into a lot of different arenas.
Yeah. We went to Owamni last night.
Oh,
and
nice.
It was so cool. I mean, I just did not
Great
even
food.
know that wheat, chickens, cows, like I have always thought that those are just here.
Yeah.
I had no idea that they're colonial foods.
Right.
I guess on that, I mean, how do you bring in that interfaith component? Is there like a natural draw? Do you see different religions or faiths or different representation among different groups within MNIPL?
Yes, we do. We have folks that work with us from all different faiths: Buddhists, Baha'i, Jewish, Congregational, Universalist, Unitarians, Unitarian Universalists, I should say, Christian of all different denominations. And a lot of congregations work within their community. So we don't necessarily provide a lot of interfaith dialogue or that type of stuff. We just support a lot of different congregations. And those congregations come together sometime in systemic activity like legislative support, or right now we're working on a bill to encourage our state to recognize the rights of wild rice in our state. And that's mainly led by our indigenous leaders. And so on that type of thing, those faith groups come together towards one goal in a common cause. And our differences from different faiths are kind of minimized by our common goal towards one thing. That was clear when we resisted the Line 3 and tried to keep Line 3 pipeline from being built across our state. So those would be the types of things. We also partner with a lot of other organizations that are not religious in any sphere. So all different kinds of environmental and climate aligned organizations come together towards clear goals, and we help people of faith get involved in those activities.
Yeah. So. And you're a former priest, rector?
Yeah, I was a priest in the Episcopal Church.
And how did you get into the climate space?
Yeah, that's a good question. This long story, I'll give you the thumbnail. I've been, involved in environmental work and causes since I was a little kid. I kind of grew up in the woods, and have always wanted to be outdoors and with the earth, and have taken up different kind of environmental causes through my life. I was an organic farmer for a while because I was concerned about our food systems and the industrial kind of food complex, and I helped start a nonprofit that addressed medical waste, perfectly good stuff that was filling up our landfills that could be used for people to save lives, and kind of helped with that. And even while I was a priest, I started community gardens, and I helped start a organic kind of cafe to involve people in the kitchen together from different walks of life. And so I've always kind of been involved in those spaces. And I got to a point where I, like you and like many people, we saw how severe the climate crisis is. And I said, okay, this is what I want to do now with my work. I still want to work with people of faith. I just want to do it dedicated in this particular way.
Yeah. And so enter Minneapolis, Interfaith Power and Light. And
yeah, I started volunteering with them with some of these pipeline resistance, standing as clergy and praying with and for activists. We went out to Standing Rock, and then I was involved in the Line 3 resistance, and had my own eyes open to a lot of things about the way our systems are built and who's privileged and who's not, and how can I support people that are trying to change those systems.
How was Standing Rock? I have to imagine that it's kind of a life-changing event.
It was beautiful. It was just unbelievably beautiful. It was a huge community of people of all different walks of life, indigenous-led. We were there to do what they asked us to do. And some of it was so fun and beautiful. There was so much good music, a lot of native drumming and chanting, and we would be woken in the morning by this elder calling across the PA system, haranguing us to get up. Oh, the black snake is not sleeping, get out of bed, and he would harangue us for about 30 minutes, at 5:30 in the morning, get out of bed, and then he would say, there's some nice black coffee up here at the refreshment station. And I met so many people, and it was just a wonderful time. I really grew a lot as a person being with those folks.
And you've touched on another massive event here in Minneapolis. The George Floyd protests were only a few years ago. How does that tie in to the work that your organization does?
We will work with any congregation at any level to take whatever step they're ready to take. In particular, we are concerned as staff and board members and affiliates of kind of the systemic problems, kind of the injustices at the kind of baked into the way our society works. And we hope to change those because they impact a lot of different parts of our society. So for instance, there was a huge mass migration in our history of folks who are Black out of the South, and they went to a lot of northern cities, and they found equal injustice in those places, just of a different stripe. And redlining, which you may be familiar with, kind of kept those folks in particular neighborhoods and minimized the amount of wealth that they could create, and created kind of a long-term systemic problem. And so you and I are kind of have some roots in the South. We know what racism looks like there. Racism looked a little different here. And it built up over time to include a largely white police population that lived in the suburbs who came to the city and policed people in the city who were a larger ethnic variety and different nations, immigrants, and people from different migrations. And so we look at those historic injustices and see those exacerbated by the climate crisis. Now, I won't say that George Floyd's murder, was caused by the climate crisis at all, but it was exacerbated. It happened in the midst of COVID that we were all experiencing in different ways. People had been locked down for a long time in their homes, and that Memorial Day weekend was kind of the first weekend of you could get out, really, and be in the parks and be outside. It was also, we've seen that early summer weekend be particularly hot because of climate change. The leaves aren't out on the trees yet, and then you get this huge spike in heat. It was a very hot weekend, and so there was already a lot of unrest and frustration, and then for that to happen and to see so graphically the historical injustice played out in that moment with George Floyd and that officer, just brutally murdering him, it just erupted. Our particular organization was connected in a way because we had some meeting space just around the block from this congregation. We were fortunate to have a board member who owned a restaurant and made available a whole area of his restaurant for climate organizations to meet and plan, and we had office space there and meeting spaces. A lot of us had created artwork there for the Line 3 resistance, and it was a real home, and it was burned down through the uprising. And it caught fire. It was really scary. A lot of us were concerned. We were also there to try and minister to people who were, there to peacefully protest, but who were injured in the melee. And so we started a first aid center there. And then when that became too dangerous because of the fire, we called our friends here at Holy Trinity, and they right away jumped into action and said, oh, by all means, let's open a first aid station here. And people from the congregation came, and some of them had already been out in the streets, but they showed up here and were helped respond to the people's needs.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. And then this was the church that was the first aid station?
Yeah.
Wow. Right. You've talked about Standing Rock. There's George Floyd. What other kind of social justice movements has your organization been a part of?
Well, part of the narrative of climate change is that we're all implicated in this system in which we extract resources from the earth, and the things that we don't want, we call pollution, and we set them aside. And those things cause problems in the long run, right?
Yeah.
Coal ash comes from burning coal, and you got to do something with the ash, and over time it builds up, and it is in a slurry, and it's behind a dam, and if you don't tend the dam, it breaks and devastates communities and hurts people and destroys their home. Carbon dioxide is less visible than coal ash, but as we know, it goes into the atmosphere. It causes the greenhouse effect, which raises the temperature, which leads to all these awful consequences. So it's this mindset of we take what we want and then don't worry about the pollution that creates these problems. And the people with the least amount of financial resources pay the first cost and the highest cost. So if I don't have, if my house is burned in a forest fire that's been exacerbated by climate change, if I don't have insurance or if I don't have money to replace my house, if I'm lower on the economic ladder, I'm going to pay the consequences worse when actually I have less consumption that created the crisis in the beginning. Yeah. And that's the main crux of the justice issue. There's a lot of other issues that are connected with that, and climate change is so big that it's connected to a lot of other justice issues like housing and healthcare and all those other ones, and it tends to make those all worse. But it is, in some ways, it's a unifying problem because everybody in the world faces it.
Essentially, climate change is a social justice issue.
Yeah, and oftentimes when we say the word social justice, we have a certain picture of a person in our mind. But we're learning in the climate crisis, it's everybody. We don't tend to think of farmers when we say social justice, but farmers are paying a terrible price. Farmers are some of the frontline people that are dealing with this. And when I think of farmers, I tend to think of, white men usually. There historically have been the people that do our farming in our country. Farm workers, we tend to think of maybe Mexico and Latin America, folks coming to our country to help do the work, to pick the produce and whatnot. But all of those people face problems. I mean, those farmers, the suicide rate among farmers has just gone sky high. And it's because they face such difficult economic straits with the changing weather and what they can plan and how it all works.
I think when you're talking about these things, I'm still just like, I'm looking at pews right now in a church. I'm surrounded by stained glass. And I'm still like, I can't believe we're talking about these things in a church right now. Like, it just seems, I grew up Episcopalian, so there's definitely, I think those things were brought up in church for me. But I was in the South, and I'm trying to picture other people in churches, maybe in other types of congregations, where it would be crazy to talk about some of these things in a church. What kind of response do you get when you go into congregations?
Yeah, that's a good question. We get a variety of responses. I think most of the time we go to a congregation because they've invited us.
Okay.
But if we're going into a congregation in some situations that hasn't necessarily invited us, or we're talking about things that maybe people haven't thought about, we go with a lot of respect. Faith communities are called on to do a lot of things. People come to a faith community for a lot of reasons. Some people come to a faith community because they want to be involved in justice issues and they want to make a difference and take action. But a lot of people come because they want to raise their kids to have a moral kind of compass.
Yeah.
Or they want to sing, or they want a place to come where they can feel secure.
Are you singing at your like meetings and stuff?
We did have a song leader for a while who helped
That's cool.
write songs and create music for our protests and our
so fun.
rallies and whatnot. Yeah. People come to a faith community for a lot of reasons. And we can't expect the faith community to be all things to all people. Yeah. We ask a lot of people who are leaders in congregations, whether they're official clergy or whether they're lay people who have volunteered to do something. And I have a lot of respect for those folks and the amount of pressure they're under, especially in these times when they're losing membership because people are disaffected by, religious understandings and whatnot.
Yeah.
So we respect that, and we work with congregations at whatever kind of engagement level they want to do. So a lot of times we can help them. We can help decrease their utility costs, which means more financial support for their efforts, and that's one way we can be helpful to them.
So faith, in the way that you've described it, is not coming off to me as what I generally think of with faith. I mean, I truly associate faith with like praying, kneeling in a church. What is the term faith how is it used in this organization? Faith,
from our perspective, is a little bit more assumed to be embedded in the human experience. It's like everybody's got a way that they understand the world, and they make meaning out of what their life is. And religious denominations and faiths in the kind of capital F or capital C, have a particular program or structure and history about the way they understand that and what that meaning is. And they have scriptures or writings or rules that kind of guide them in that. But everybody engages with the world and one another and has to come up with what's their life mean.
Yeah.
So, in our day, I think religion has stumbled in some places pretty dramatically. And we're seeing pressures in a lot of different ways that question religion, maybe for really good reasons. But there's some things that religion has provided that are now absent from a lot of people's life that are causing some problems. For instance, we see a real rise in mental health problems among younger folks. And those folks tend to be less associated with a community and have less support people to people than maybe folks did, 40, 50 years ago who were more embedded in a congregation. So while the congregation may have some blind spots about society and the way we should interact, it has provided a level of connection and support that maybe are absent in some other folks' life now. You know what I mean?
So interesting. Yeah. And I mean, I, in my former job, was looking at loneliness a lot. And so it's just interesting that you bring up the lack of religion and maybe some correlation between, why people are more lonely.
Well, it's a question. I've read some studies. I don't know that they're definitive, but yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. We're also seeing, with climate change, we're seeing a huge rise in migration and immigration. I was reading an article just this morning that used Facebook data to determine that more people don't live in their home country than ever in the existence of humanity. So our concerns about immigration in our country may be very valid, but they're pushing against a tide that is not going to stop unless climate change stops. And congregations have historically been places that welcome in the stranger and that provide for folks who are new to the community. And if we lose those places of community, what will replace them? What are the communities that will replace them? At our organization, we try to take a broad view of religion, both because there's so many different religions and we learn a lot paying attention to the ways people understand that. For instance, I've grown a lot listening to Buddhists who don't center their religion on a deity. It's a non-deist religion that brings a new awareness that I hadn't thought about before. The Baha'is, they have a deep, long-term, from the very beginning in their DNA, connection to the earth. That's part of the way they see things. They also don't do anything with politics. It's absolutely forbidden to do anything with politics within the Baha'i faith. So very different.
Like even voting?
I know that people who are Baha'i vote, but they don't, there's nothing in the religion that prescribes that or talks about that.
So interesting.
So there's a big, wide range of people. And more we see people who are not affiliated with any structural religion, making meaning of their life through taking climate action and finding important relationships and community, solidarity with one another through taking those climate actions. We see a lot of people really drawn to indigenous wisdom about our earth connections and our responsibilities as a human being, as somebody who lives and breathes because of the abundance of the planet. And that's an important set of wisdom that many of us have not had access to before, that we're starting to pay attention to. Our organization really tries to raise up leaders in the indigenous space who carry that with them and teach us about our kinship to plants and animals and the abundance that's provided for us, and our responsibility as a fellow family member of that world, that earth and those creatures. So,
how does your faith shape your understanding of our environmental responsibility?
I would answer that less with my specific affiliation within a Christian denomination and more from my root beginning. I grew up in the woods, I told you.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time alone as a kid in the woods just because of some circumstances. I learned how to ride a horse before I rode a bike. And I experienced what I later came to appreciate in the particular religious tradition that I was in was a sense of the same essence and presence that I had experienced organically, being outside. Yeah. And so I personally have a real call to responsibility in the same way that a person might for their mother or father or their child. I feel a real responsibility to care for the planet, to care for the actual creatures and the forest, and that has provided so much to me in my life that I want to save that. I want other people to have that too, have that abundance.
Yeah, I think it's so similar to how I have also developed. I think I don't think about it often, but there's just always been this like unity between God and nature and everybody who lives on the earth. It's so connected. What role do you see faith communities having in the broader climate movement?
Well, a lot of faith communities that are more structured, that look to a particular written uh, set of scriptures, whether it's the Quran or the Bible or some portion of that. Um, they've done great work on going back to examine their theology and their understanding based on present events. And they've lifted up maybe parts of their theology that were quiet or that weren't as paid, that people didn't pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's just been some beautiful, great thinking and reflection and writing about that within a lot of different denominations. The Lutheran church that we're in a Lutheran church now, they've done a particularly good job of writing about that from the Christian point of view and the Christian scriptures. It's a social statement that they wrote that's really well done. Started in 1993, revised just in 2023. So I think there's a place for faith communities to do that and to do that work of really examining the roots of who they are and why they think what they think or believe what they believe. I think the other place is to come from a point of humility. Most religions teach some humility, some aspect of a person honoring both their dignity and their humility, and to show up in spaces humble and ready to work alongside others. I see that over and over in the people that join our work and support us, or maybe even out front of the work that we do, is showing up with some humility and being willing to listen to the other people that maybe don't come from a religious background and stand shoulder to shoulder with them.
Yeah. What if people are watching this? How might they get involved in something similar to your organization? How can they activate within their church, within their community?
I would say, if they're part of a faith community, they should go talk to the people that run that faith community, whether that's a official kind of clergy person per se, or whether it's just the people that manage that congregation and lead it, and ask them about the concerns that they have about the earth and about climate change and those things. That's the best start, is to find out what maybe the community is already doing something, or maybe they can help, get some folks more interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
If folks want to get involved with an organization, we have affiliates around the state, around the country. Probably they've got one in their state. They can contact the IPL in their state, Interfaith Power and Light, and find out what's going on and how they could get involved. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of different, we say the bad thing about the climate crisis is it's overwhelming and huge. The good thing is pretty much anywhere you step, you can be involved. You don't have to change the job you have. You don't have to change your community. Where climate change is happening anywhere and everywhere, and we need everybody to do everything. So your job is probably meaningful for improving climate change. If, some people might be more attracted to another particular way of going about facing climate crisis. Maybe they're not as drawn to the justice side of things. Maybe they're a scientist, or they're a business person, and they want, they're really good at math and they want to deal with carbon emissions and draw down that, or they're an engineer and they want to, come at it from, some kind of technological standpoint. We need everybody to do everything. So
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Love sharing coffee with you.
Great. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Appreciate it.